I'm going to give you a breakdown of the NFL matchup between the Minnesota Vikings and the Green Bay Packers, and we're starting right now. What is going on? My name is Alpha Omega. Welcome to another video. If this is your first time here and you want to learn how to bet on sports like a pro and gain an edge over the sportsbooks, start now by subscribing and clicking the bell so you don't miss anything. Week 1 of the 2019 season is now in the books, and while there is a lot of valuable information that can help sports bettors and sports fans make more winning wagers in Week 2, it's important to remember not to overreact based on 1 week's worth of statistical data and performance. Just because one team had amazing offensive production in Week 1 does not mean that you should expect the same level of production to continue in Week 2. In fact, it's relatively safe to expect the majority of teams that had extraordinarily good or extraordinarily bad Week 1 performances to regress back toward the NFL average. That's not to say that this is always the case, but don't expect teams like the Steelers to get embarrassed again this coming week, or teams like the Redskins to continue to put up big offensive numbers. Before you decide how to process the data from Week 1, you have to take into account the strengths and weaknesses of each team's Week 1 opponent, along with injuries prior to and during the game. And new this season, you have to factor in the unusually large number of top skill position players that didn't play at all during the preseason. While from an injury perspective, not playing during the preseason makes sense, reacclimating to the speed of the NFL takes time to adjust to. And whether the adjustment period is 1 half, 1 game, or more depends on the player. But as I'll go over shortly, every player needs that adjustment period, especially a quarterback. Some things don't change from year to year, but some things do. And assigning significance to these changes and correctly adjusting based on the opponent is one of the primary differences between a casual fan and a successful sports bettor. The starting point for my handicap in Week 2 begins with my team power rankings. Taking into account the offensive and defensive rankings for each team and adjusting those rankings for their opponent, the most competitive Week 2 matchup has Kirk Cousins and the Minnesota Vikings traveling to Lambeau Field to take on Aaron Rodgers and the Green Bay Packers. Both of these teams missed the playoffs in 2018, but I expect this to change with both teams being significantly improved. But more on that later in the video. Both teams match up well on both sides of the ball, and this is reflected in the betting lines. The Alpha Omega Vegas consensus line has the Packers favored by 3 points, with the total being bet down from the opener of 46 down to 44 at most sportsbooks. It's important to recognize that home field advantage in the NFL is 3 points, so on a neutral field this game would be pick'em. Implied odds mean based on the current moneyline odds, what is the projected implied probability of victory? Basically, it's the chances of victory expressed as a percentage. In this case, Vegas is saying there is a 62% probability that the Packers win outright, with the Vikings having a 41% chance of pulling off the upset. Using my power rankings, I have the Packers favored by 3.25 points, and the total at 44.5. But remember, my power rankings are only the starting point for a successful handicap. The success or failure of the Packers offense rests on the shoulders of coach Matt LaFleur and his ability to revitalize the Packer offense and get the most out of quarterback Aaron Rodgers. So if the new coach is supposed to help the offense, then why did the Packers only score 10 points against the Bears defense? As usual when handicapping a game, there isn't one easy answer. But with context, we can see some of the reasons why the Packer offense didn't impress in Week 1. Matt LaFleur has coached alongside both Kyle Shanahan and Sean McVay, and based on what little life we saw of the Packer offense in Week 1, there are aspects of both coaches in LaFleur's scheme. Week 1 against the Bears saw the Packer offense running 48% of their plays under center, versus only 23% last season under former Packer coach Mike McCarthy. Shanahan and McVay ranked first and second in snaps under center in 2018. LaFleur also ran a majority of the offense out of 3 receiver 1-back sets, also called 11 personnel, and also used some bunch formations designed to open up space for receivers downfield. both of which are trademark McVay concepts. The Packers also utilized two-back or 21 personnel looks, which are staples of Kyle Shanahan's offensive scheme. Pre- and post-snap motion is also a factor in LaFleur's offense, with Green Bay utilizing motion on roughly 40% of their offensive plays versus only 27% last year under Mike McCarthy. Utilizing these formations and increasing motion in the offense statistically gives the Packers a greater chance of scoring, or a greater expected points added value. So if statistically the Packers should be scoring, why didn't they score? The biggest reason for the Packers not scoring is the lack of preparation on the part of quarterback Aaron Rodgers. Let me explain. In 2019, on average, starting quarterbacks dropped back to pass a total of 17 times over the course of the preseason. Most quarterbacks drop back to pass double that in a single game. In 2019, there were 15 quarterbacks in their first full year with their offensive coach, including Aaron Rodgers. There were 4 quarterbacks who didn't play a snap in the preseason, and only one of those quarterbacks was in their first full season with their offensive play caller. That one quarterback was Aaron Rodgers. The full reasoning behind this decision is unclear, but what we do know is Coach LaFleur has a lot of passing plays in his offensive arsenal, and because the decision was made not to play Rodgers at all during the preseason, the offense looked stale, Rodgers never got in an offensive rhythm, and the team looked bad offensively. You can point to a few different reasons why the offense couldn't generate points, but every potential excuse can be traced back to Rodgers not being familiar with his new coach's offensive scheme in a full-speed, full-contact game setting. Rodgers was indecisive with the football because he didn't play in the preseason, and was the least prepared quarterback in the NFL heading into Week 1. The Packers' offensive line and running back Aaron Jones did little to help Rodgers, as Jones only rushed for 39 yards on 13 carries, which allowed the Bears to sell out against the pass. The Packers will be up against another tough defense in the Vikings, but the Packers' offense should not be underestimated based on their performance in Week 1. And if the Packers want to win in Week 2, the offensive line will have to open up holes for Jones to force the Vikings defense to honor the run, or else we will see a repeat of the Packers' dismal Week 1 performance. Prior to the start of the season, the Vikings defense ranked top 10 in my defensive power rankings, and after Minnesota's dominant defensive performance in Week 1 against the Falcons, I further adjusted my rankings to put Minnesota on the edge of the top 5. While you can't overreact to the performance of one week, based on the offensive capabilities of the Falcons, moving the Vikings defense up is justified. While this Falcons team is not the same team that went to the Super Bowl 3 years ago, this is mostly due to the absence of former Falcons offensive coordinator and current San Francisco 49er head coach Kyle Shanahan. The Vikings still have enough offensive talent to disrupt any defensive scheme, and when deciding how to handicap the Vikings defense in Week 2, it's important to factor in the confused offensive play calling of Dirk Cutter and the poor decision-making by Matt Ryan. The Vikings defense showed their ability to beat opponents off the line, generating 4 sacks and 18 hurried throws. The consistent pressure generated by the Vikings defense forced Matt Ryan to attempt hurried throws to receivers who had not yet reached the apex of their receiving routes, causing 2 interceptions, allowing only 1 completion of 20 yards or more, and not allowing a single Falcons receiver to reach 100 yards receiving. The Vikings defense completely shut down the Falcons' running game, and shutting down the run forced the Falcons into becoming a one-dimensional team. The Vikings shut out the Falcons for 3 quarters, and with one of the 2 Falcons touchdowns coming in garbage time with 1 minute left in the 4th quarter, the Vikings defense essentially only allowed 1 touchdown in the game. The Vikings defense outperformed expectations in Week 1. But will that dominance continue against the Packers offense with a top 5 quarterback like Aaron Rodgers? Yes and no. The Packers offensive line allowed 5 sacks against the Chicago Bears, and I expect the Packers to continue and give up sacks against the Vikings. But Aaron Rodgers' decision-making and his scrambling ability will prevent the Vikings defense from generating the same type of hurried throws seen against Matt Ryan and the Falcons. I also expect the Vikings secondary to be tested on deep throws by Rodgers. But the key to the Vikings' success or failure defensively will be their ability to contain Aaron Jones and the Packers' running game. If the Packers force the Vikings defense to cheat up and honor the threat to run, Rodgers will have sustained success against the Vikings defense. The Vikings offense will also have a much tougher time in Week 2, as the Green Bay defense had the most complete overall Week 1 defensive performance. While the Packer defense looks to be the best Green Bay has had since the Packers' 2010 Super Bowl winning season, some of the responsibility for the Packers' defensive success has to be attributed to the atrocious play of Mitchell Trubisky. Trubisky ranked 31st in my Week 1 quarterback rankings, and when a quarterback plays as poorly as Trubisky did, the tendency is to overreact to the opponent's defensive performance. Factoring Trubisky into the defensive ranking, the Packers were still able to generate pressure on more than half of the Bears' total offensive plays, and considering that the Bears had a preseason offensive line ranking in the top 10, and the Vikings' offensive line was ranked as one of the lowest in the NFL, the Packers' ability to pressure the quarterback will force Cousins into more hurried throws in a constantly disintegrating pocket. The Green Bay pass coverage also ranked at the top of the league in Week 1, and while some of the success can be attributed to the embarrassing Week 1 play by quarterback Mitchell Trubisky, the Packers coverage team blanketed the Bears receivers throughout the game, allowing only 5 completed passes of more than 10 yards. The Vikings receiving corps is one of the best in the NFL. But with the pressure generated by the Packers defense, the question is whether or not the Vikings offensive line will open up the same type of holes for Dalvin Cook, and whether Kirk Cousins will have enough time to complete passes. The Vikings offense scored 28 points against the Falcons in Week 1, and looked dominant against a Falcons defense that looked completely unprepared. Half of the Vikings' 28 points were scored in the first quarter, with both scoring drives starting on the Falcons' end of the field because of Atlanta turnovers, meaning that in the first 7 minutes of the game, the Vikings scored 14 of their 28 points, generating only 2 scores during the remainder of the game. Turnovers are a statistically random occurrence, and given that the Vikings defense will be going up against Aaron Rodgers, one of the least turnover-prone quarterbacks in the NFL, the Vikings offense will be asked for a great deal more in Week 2. Kirk Cousins is historically a reliable and efficient passer when given protection and time to throw. But when you look at past year's statistics, when pressured, Cousins ranks at the bottom of the league. When Cousins faces pressure, he consistently makes mistakes, and given that the Packers will be forcing Cousins to make throws under pressure throughout the game, the Vikings will need to establish Dalvin Cook as a rushing threat in order to give Cousins the time he needs to be successful. Dalvin Cook came into the season with questions surrounding his health following a 2018 season where he failed to live up to the promise he showed prior to his ACL tear in his rookie season in 2017. As has been shown throughout the injury history of the modern NFL, it often takes a full season post-ACL tear for the player to return to the level of play demonstrated prior to the injury. After Cook rushed for 111 yards and 2 touchdowns in Week 1, it's safe to say that Cook is now fully healthy and will play a large factor moving forward in offensive coordinator Kevin Stefanski and assistant offensive advisor Gary Kubiak's run-heavy West Coast offensive scheme. The key to the Vikings' success offensively will be the Vikings' offensive line creating running lanes for Dalvin Cook, which will force the Packer defense to bring more defenders into the box to defend against the run. Doing this will go a long way in limiting the pressure on Kirk Cousins, allowing him to be the accurate, efficient passer he can be. The margin of victory in this game will be determined by Aaron Rodgers increasing his familiarity with Matt LaFleur's offense, the Vikings defense limiting running back Aaron Jones from having a productive day, the Vikings offensive line giving Kirk Cousins enough time to make an accurate throw, and the Packers defense getting pressure on the quarterback. Whichever team accomplishes those goals will win the game and cover the spread. Okay guys, that's the video. Let me know what you think. If you feel like you picked up some new information that will help you make smarter bets in Week 2 of the NFL, or if you gained some insight into the factors to think about when handicapping a football game, let me know in the comments. And if you want to gain an edge over the bookies and get the picks that I bet on each week, make sure to head over to my website and sign up for one of my sports packages. Whether you're an everyday bettor who needs a consistent way to increase and grow your bankroll, or whether you don't even know what a bankroll is and sports betting just became legal in your state, I have a package that will work for you. So click the link in the description and sign up for a package now. And if you want to stay updated with all the sports betting guides across all major sports, start now by hitting the round subscribe icon so you don't miss anything. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you next time.